Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. I hope you had a good weekend and that your week is off to a good start. Our weekend was a little up and down, actually. My husband's a big Michigan fan, so he was really excited over the Ohio State-Michigan game. That was good, but we also found out that a friend of his had died of COVID, and so that was definitely the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, and then just a bunch of other little things in between. So it was a very up and down kind of weekend. But I hope that your weekend was good, but if it wasn't good, I hope you at least had some good support people around you that you could talk to and get whatever kind of emotional support you may have needed in whatever happened to you over your weekend. I am excited for this episode because I have a returning guest to the podcast. Author Brenda Marie Smith joined me for the first time back in February of 2020. If you want to go back and listen to that episode either before you listen to this one or after, or whatever order you prefer, that is episode number 215. And so Brenda is back again to talk about it's a standalone. The books can definitely be read separately, but it is the sequel to her first novel, If Darkness Takes Us. These are post-apocalyptic speculative fiction books. Let me go ahead and give you the description from the back of the new book, which is called If the Light Escapes. A solar electromagnetic pulse has fried the U.S. grid. Now, northern lights are in Texas, 3,000 miles farther south than where they belong. The universe won't stop screwing with 18-year-old Keno Sims. All that's left for him and his broken family is farming their Austin subdivision, trying to eke out a living on poor soil in the scorching heat. Keno's one solace is his love for Alma, who has her own secret sorrows. When he gets her pregnant, he vows to keep her alive no matter what. Yet armed marauders and nature itself collude against him, forcing him to make choices that rip at his conscience. If the Light Escapes is post-apocalyptic science fiction set in a near future reality, a coming-of-age story told in the voice of a heroic teen who's forced into manhood too soon. And that is the description of If the Light Escapes. It is, as I said, the standalone sequel to If Darkness Takes Us. And we're going to talk about this more in the interview, but the first book, If Darkness Takes Us, I cannot talk tonight. If Darkness Takes Us was not narrated by Keno. In fact, it was narrated by Keno's grandmother, Bee. So you have very different tones, very different voices and points of view in these two books. Bee is a grandmother. She has 4 grandchildren. She is obviously older. She has a lot of experience. And now you have 18-year-old Keno, younger, not much experience. Obviously, his young life has been turned upside down by this electromagnetic pulse that has affected the United States. And one thing that struck me this time was Keno is at one point in the book thinking about the other side of the planet that was dark when the electromagnetic pulse fried the U.S. grid, and he's wondering, do they still have electricity? Were there other electromagnetic pulses at other times, other solar flares that fried other parts of the world? And I guess I hadn't really thought about that in the first book, the fact that half the planet is dark at any given time. And so only a certain part of the world would be affected by a solar electromagnetic pulse. So Kino is thinking about that, and now it's actually something that keeps popping into my head. But this is post-apocalyptic, but not like post-apocalyptic where there is a virus that kills half the planet or turns half the planet into zombies or some other version. It's just that the grid goes down and everyone is without power and without cars and everything that we are so used to on any given day. And what do you do then? You don't have communication. Cell phones are gone. Geez, if you think about everything that we use during in any given day that requires electricity, and then to suddenly be without that, and now you're back to trying to communicate. Think of Austin in relation to Washington, D.C. How do you get communications from the government and what's going on? And Austin is, of course, the capital of Texas, but still, how are you getting communications? It's fascinating to me. And so I really love that the books are told from different points of view. You get very different perspectives in these books. And so this one is, of course, Kino's story. And let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Brenda so she can tell you more about the series and especially the new book, If the Light Escapes. Hi, Brenda. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Thanks for coming back. And we are going to talk about your new book, If the Light Escapes. But before we do that, for anyone who didn't hear the first episode or who needs a refresher, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I was born in Oklahoma, but I've lived in Austin, Texas for 41 years. And in between Oklahoma and Texas, I lived in a hippie community called The Farm. We were vegans before there was a term for it. We called ourselves complete vegetarians. And both my kids were delivered there by midwives. And we lived off the grid. And so I learned how to do that. And we had water delivered to barrels up the hill from our house, and then PVC pipe that ran the water into our sinks in our tent houses. We lived in tent houses. Those army field tents like on the TV show MASH. Mm-hmm. That's what we lived in. And anyway, since then I've been in Austin. I worked for student housing co-ops. I married a man with 3 sons, so now we have 5 sons between us, grown, and 3 grandkids. One of them is new to us. The others are 11 and 15. And we're happy. We've been married for 26 years, and we're going to move to a new house soon. So that's keeping me hopping.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you've got quite a lot going on right now.
Sure do. I had to revive all my multitasking skills. I thought I'd lost them, but they were there.
They were just dormant.
That's right. They were resting. Prepare for this.
I am sure that I said this the last time you were on, but your life just, I could spend a couple of hours on this podcast just asking you random questions about your life and your experiences. But I won't, because we're here to talk about your book. I will just ask one question and that's, was it odd, or how was your transition when you transitioned back, from the farm to quote unquote regular society, whatever you want to call it?
I got a little help with that because the farm had satellites all around the country, and I lived on several of those in Baton Rouge, Miami, Homestead, Florida, San Diego, and then in Austin. And so on those places, we had, the modern conveniences of running water and electricity and stuff. So, and we interacted more with, our neighbors and stuff. So that actually helped me a lot with the transition to living in a regular in the regular all-American world.
Mm-hmm. And it's actually kind of the opposite of what happens in your books. So
right.
with that segue, if you want to give an overview of the duology as it exists now, and then we'll talk about the new one.
Okay. So in the first book, If Darkness Takes Us, we have Grandma B. Crenshaw, and she has been worried about environmental catastrophe for years, and she inherits $2 million from her aunt, and she doesn't tell her husband about it because she thinks of him as Cranky Hank or Hank the Crank, because he's not very nice. And and she uses the money to buy the house behind hers, and she fills it full of food and survival supplies, tools, seeds, water, and then she's keeping her 4 grandkids while her husband and her grown kids go to the OU Texas football game up in Dallas. And while they're all gone, a solar pulse destroys the U.S. grid and most of the cars, except cars that don't have internal computers, which also means there's no more running water, there's no natural gas delivery to your house, there's no internet, no phones, and she's left at home, and the parents don't come home, and she's left alone with 4 grandkids in a neighborhood full of hungry people. But because of her secret house, she's prepared. And our big decision in that book is whether or not to share what she has with the neighbors. And during that book, a lot of things happen, but Keno, who's her oldest grandson, who's 17 in that book, kind of stands out as a really great, interesting character, and who has to grow up a lot and go through some very hard things. And so in the sequel, If the Light Escapes, Keno, the book is told from Keno's point of view. And gee, what can I tell you about Keno?
Well, I'm just going to jump in here and say, after the first one, Keno drops the F-bomb a couple of times on the first page, and I was like, Brenda!
I know, a lot of my
it's a different voice.
Like, I never let my kids talk that way. And I'm like, okay, but it's an apocalypse.
Well, and it's a different voice than Nana's, than Bee's voice. So of course
right.
It has to.
She only uses that word like once or twice in the whole other book, and during super extreme situations. Whereas Keno, it's just he's casual cusser. Okay, so I raised 5 boys, and that's how they talk. It's just
Yes,
it's just the way they talk. And I also worked with college students for 15 years, and that's just how they talk. In fact, and now they've grown up, and I still talk that way.
They were bad influences on you.
They were.
Yeah. It's time to take the first break of the podcast, but I just was thinking, I don't think I was ever a bad influence on my grandmother. No, I don't think I was. She was very proper until the end. She, I think, only knew about one of my tattoos, but she was not happy about it. And I never heard her swear, ever. So I was not a bad influence on my grandmother. I don't know if I should be proud of that or not, if I should have tried to be more of a bad influence on her. Oh, well, I'll contemplate that while we take a break. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Brenda Murray Smith about her new book, If the Light Escapes. Let's return to that interview.
Talk a little bit about this book is from Kino's perspective, but it continues the story from the first book. And they can be read together, of course, but they can also be read separately. So can you talk a little bit about Kino and this book?
Sure. Okay. So Kino, he's quite the guy. He was a science nerd before the sun zapped him, is his way of describing it. And he's mad because of all the things that have happened and the tragedies he's had to live with. And he's having a hard time coping with them. But he falls in love with his sister's best friend, Alma, and they marry themselves in their own little ceremony that they invented themselves, and they're both 18, although she's barely 18. And the thing about Kino is he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he's angry, but he's also really stalwart, stoic, hardworking guy with a great big heart. He loves his wife. He loves he's very much a Nana's boy. He really loves his grandmother. He loves his cousins who were, trapped there in the situation with him. And whatever he's going through, he's going to tell you about it, whether it's happy or sad. And you're going to feel it with him, I think. And Alma gets pregnant. He gets her pregnant, and he vows he's worried about being able to keep her alive because they're short on water, they're short on food, and there's dangers everywhere outside the neighborhood. And he's worried about keeping her alive. But he vows he's going to do it no matter if he has to die himself to keep her alive. And then it seems like everything conspires against him to make it harder and harder for them to survive. And tragedies happen. And then there's these, his grandpa is just a big mess. His grandpa and at the very end of the first book, it's just kind of a spoiler, but the parents and grandpa do come home. So, but his mom is mad at him about a tragedy that happened in the first book. And his grandpa is crankier than ever and is forever brandishing weapons and causing trouble. And let's see, it's a coming of age story in an apocalypse. He's forced into manhood too soon before he's really emotionally ready, but he has to get emotionally ready. There's armed marauders in a neighborhood not too far away that are stealing from them and roaming their neighborhood at night, and they have to patrol to keep themselves safe. And Kino feels like presents such a danger, he has to go spy on them. And when he does, all hell breaks loose.
a couple of comments. First, I think cranky might be way too mild of a word for Hank. Psychotic might be a good word, or
there you go.
a word that starts with an A, but this is a PG podcast, so I'm not going to say it.
Exactly.
And then the progression between the two books. The first one is really the aftermath of the solar flares and trying to figure out what now, what is life now. And now this community has been living with that aftermath for a little over a year. And so now they're trying to deal with the new normal, and what does that look, and how are they going to continue keeping their community safe and keeping everyone fed. So in some ways, it's kind of the mundane day to day, but it's nothing, but it is not mundane in any way.
Yeah, there's a lot of action. There's violence, which kind of upset some of my nonviolent hippie friends. One of my friends said to me, she was describing the book to somebody else, and she goes, I don't know what came over Brenda. She used to be a nonviolent hippie all her life, because there's violence in the book. And I'm saying,
Right.
Well, it's the genre. You have to do what, I mean, in apocalypse, there's going to be violence.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, when you watch movies and there are zombies or some things like that, it's almost never completely the zombies who are the problem. It's still the human communities that are the threat. And that's really where we focus here is the human communities are, they're all fighting for survival, and they're doing it in different ways.
Right. I would say what makes my book different than a lot of apocalypses is it's way more, both the books are character focused, and rather than the perils are definitely part of it and put the characters through a lot of changes, but it's very family oriented. It's like a family saga almost. So, but and then nature is also, seems like it's conspiring against them too, because it's throwing, first it throws them droughts, and then it throws them horrible storms that wash out the crops, because they're farming. They have to farm their neighborhood, all the lawns, and the park next to them, and the field on the other side of them, and they have to get firewood from the train tracks where there was a train wreck that leaked poison into the soil. So, it's a treacherous life they're living, and they could run out of water or food. All kinds of things could go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about Kino. And you've mentioned a few things about his character, but what about him do you think is going to resonate with readers?
I think his emotions and his heroism, the way I've been told by a lot of readers that they really feel him, what he's going through, feel for him. So like some of the women who were upset about the cussing got over that real quick when they got to know him and understand him. And then he's very heroic. He puts his, he takes care of everybody else before he takes care of himself, which ends up causing him problems. About halfway through the book, it all piles up on him, and it's too much for him to take, but he keeps on plugging away anyway. And that's my favorite thing about writing novels is to explore how ordinary, everyday people have to find their inner strength and their inner heroism to survive and triumph over horrible things that happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping people get inspired by his heroism.
Yeah, and for he's so young. He's only 17 or 18, and he's married. He and his wife are having a baby. He's having to deal with a lot of things that he would not normally have to deal with as an 18-year-old young man.
Well, and he also notices things that most of the adults around him don't seem to notice, mm-hmm. like problems things that are going wrong that nobody seems to care about but him. And he has to convince all these older people to listen to him, and some do and some don't. And that's really rough too. But I think that happens. I think sometimes, he's kind of a genius in a lot of ways. And so he's smart and he notices everything. And I think, geniuses sometimes have a hard time being understood by the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Time for the second break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about those different voices, different points of view in the first and second book between Bee and Kino. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Brenda Marie Smith.
There's some plot-related reasons why the shift in voice makes sense, but I don't want to give anything away from the first book, really, or from the beginning of this book. But Kino and Bee are very different. I mean, they're grandson and grandmother, but you've got, in the first book, you've got an older woman. In this book, you've got a much younger male voice. Can you talk about the difference in writing those two voices? How was that for you as an author?
Well, okay. So Bee's voice is very similar to my own, Grandma Bee, although she's a little more polite and straight-laced than I am. But she's like a cross between me and my mother, I would say, as far as the straight-laced aspect of her. So that came real naturally because it's so much me. But and then Kino, I was actually worried that he wouldn't be able to carry a full novel as an 18-year-old and a full adult novel because, he's just 18. I didn't know if he could carry the weight of all the drama. But as soon as I started writing him, he just gushed out of me. It was surprising that, what National Novel Writing Month is, NaNoWriMo.
Mm-hmm, yep.
They have it every November. And I started that book, first word, November 1st. And I, before November was over, there's still 3 days left, I had 120,000 words.
Wow.
Which is way too long, of course, but I could not type fast enough to keep up with him. And I think that's because I raised 5 sons and worked with college students, and I also have 3 brothers, and I think I had an 18-year-old boy living inside me that I didn't know was there.
He just needed to be let out.
I had once I gave him voice, he wouldn't stop talking.
That can be typical of some teenagers.
Right.
So,
right. And then I spent, a year taming him, cutting the book down and getting rid of all his excess words. So,
I'm sure that was a process.
Oh yeah, it was. And then of course I sent it to the publisher, and they want major changes, and they gave me 9 weeks to basically rewrite half the book.
Oh geez.
Yeah.
Yikes. Well, in terms of characters, not just Kino, but the other characters in the book, obviously you had a pretty good idea of some of those characters because this is the second book in this world. But in terms of character development, do you like to have a really good, strong picture of a character before you start writing, or do you like that character to develop as you write?
I always wish I had a strong idea even before I start writing, but I often don't. It just comes as I write it. And then a lot of my revisions, I spend a lot of time rewriting after the first draft. The first draft, I think, it was Terry Pratchett who said, that's the author telling themselves the story. And then from there, I have to go back and build in more character development, and once I get an idea of how the character fits in the overall story, it's easier for me to go back and make sure they have a good, strong emotional arc, and that, that their emotions are clear on the page, not just something I know inside my head, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. What types of research did you do for this book?
Well, I did not have to research living off the grid, which is what people think I did.
Right.
Because I had done it for many years of my life. Because even before I lived in the hippie commune, I had lived off the grid in the woods of Arkansas. So I didn't have to research that. I had to research quite a bit about solar pulses and northern lights and magnetic shifts in the earth that could cause northern lights to move to Texas, which we didn't mention, but there are northern lights in Texas in this second book, which is 3,000 miles further south than where they belong.
Yeah, I barely saw northern lights when I lived in Montana, and I never saw them when I lived in Texas.
No, they don't.
They don't exist there.
But if they happen, I'm running for the hills.
I don't blame you. One thing that I like about your Twitter account is that you talk about, you talk about your experience in terms of living off the grid. You talk about how that experience would translate into even maybe life after some kind of apocalyptic event. And some of the comments that you get that you respond to so perfectly.
Oh wow, really?
You've got this great sort of like grandmotherly sense of, well, you're an idiot, but you don't say that. I love to hear some of your clapbacks, because people are like, well, I know from TV that you do this in an apocalypse and you'll die. Yeah.
Well, people have the wrong idea about, that was one of my goals, was I wanted to write what I thought. There's so many ideas about what an apocalypse will be, but I wanted to write what I thought that it would really be,
Mm-hmm.
because, and I feel like, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose all your modern conveniences, no matter what the cause of it. It could be a storm, it could be fires, it could be, there's a lot of things that could cause earthquakes besides the solar pulse.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's going to be environmental hazards that result from it too. And you're going to be reliant on whoever's around you when it happens to survive. And you're going to have to work on your communication skills and get along with your neighbors and your family just to survive. And so that's what I really wanted to convey. And what's interesting, Sarah, is that after I wrote the book, the first book came out in October 2019, And a few months later, we were plunged into the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many similarities with the isolation that it caused, and so that you're not out communicating with the rest of the world nearly as much. And then while I was working on revisions to If the Light Escapes, we had the Texas snowpocalypse, where we had no power.
Oh, that's right.
Several days, and it was 6 degrees outside, and no power meant no heat. We had a fireplace, but we didn't have a big stock of firewood. So we had to do all kinds of finagling. We had to send so we took the best driver in the family, my son, who's a mechanic, and he drove the best car for driving on ice that we own. And he had to go pick up my grandkids from their mother's apartment, and her up to where they had no heat at all. And then he had to drive them to their dad's and his dad's girlfriend, where they were iced in, but they had power and heat and fireplace and water. And so they had to walk 15 minutes out to meet JD and the grandkids and their mother and walk them back in, but they pulled a sleigh full of firewood for us. So then he had to load the firewood in the truck and bring it back to us.
Well, that was some unintended research.
Right.
I can only imagine that
it
it'll
was
be helpful.
so much like the only thing, the thing I didn't get in B's book that happened that I wish I had was all the appliances in our house kept talking to us after the power went out.
Okay.
They're like, low battery, no power. And they did it for like a day and a half.
Did you spend a lot of time saying, shut up, we know?
Yes. We figured out how to turn off a couple of them, but the rest of them just kept going.
Oh, that's funny. This book ends in a way that is definitely open-ended. Are you going to continue in this world?
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing NaNoWriMo this month, and before I started, I had 26,000 words written. A lot of it things I had cut from If the Light Escapes, and I had to rework them completely. And then now I've written 54,000 new words, so I've got 80,000 words of a novel. That's the sequel, the third in the series, and it may or may not be the last one. I'm not sure.
Okay, and is this one in Kino's voice as well?
This one I'm using multiple points of view.
Okay.
There's some surprises in it, but Kino is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so are his cousins, Milo and Maisie.
Oh, good. Yeah, we need more from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So
I'm going to try to leave it with more hope.
Yes, actually, there's a great quote about hope in this book that I had marked down, but now I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Anyway, I wrote a note about it.
Is it the one where he says, "We may be doomed, but I'm going to hope forever that."
Possibly. Let's see. Yep, we might be doomed, but I'm going to hope forever, no matter the evidence that we are not. Yeah, good memory.
Well, there's another place where he says, "My heart won't beat without hope; it just won't."
Yeah. Well, no, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
So
Mine
when
won't
you
either.
when you do NaNoWriMo, what's your goal? Do you have a daily word count, or how do you set that up for yourself?
Well, I tried to do a daily word count, but especially now with trying to buy a new house and get this house ready to sell, I didn't always get to, but I wrote at least some words every day, but I didn't always make the count. But then I had other days where I got to write long hours, and so that got me ahead early on, which was good because with all the things that came up that I had to deal with, there were a lot of days when I had to wait till after 8 or 9 in the evening, and then I'd spit out a few hundred words, call it a day. But I had other days where I got 3,000 words. So it all worked out that I hit the 50,000 on like the 22nd, I think.
Oh, 21st. Nice. I
So,
do sometimes wonder why NaNoWriMo is in November. I mean, you've got Thanksgiving, you've got
right.
Christmas preparation, you throw in moving. I mean, it just doesn't seem like the best time to be writing, but what do I know?
Right, but I don't, I'm not, it seems like every month has something, but yeah, it is a particularly strong, and that, it's probably something to do with some kind of declaration they got sometime for have a national novel writing month. But they have other times of year where they do it too.
Yeah,
they do it a little differently, but
right. NaNoWriMo seems to be maybe the best well-known. I could be wrong, but that's how it seems.
Time for our third and final break of the podcast, but just jumping in here again to say also that I have nothing against the people who came up with NaNoWriMo. I just don't know the reason being behind why it's in November, and for my own brain, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I could write a novel at all, so there's that. But I am not sure that November would be my best time to focus and really buckle down and write 5,000 words a day, or however many words I set for myself. Maybe five words a day. That'll be my goal for next November. I will write 5 words a day, and by the end of November, I'll have 150 words, and we'll go from there. People who do NaNoWriMo are, people who write in general, pretty amazing. And then to do NaNoWriMo, I'm pretty impressed. So let's take that final break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Brenda Marie Smith.
What do you hope? We talked about hope just a few minutes ago, and what would you like for readers to take away from the books that you write?
I want them to realize that survival depends on each other. Our survival as a species, or as a family, or is just, yourself. It depends on being good and helping each other out. I don't think we're going to survive any other way, no matter what happens, And so I want them to realize that, and I want them to have a clear understanding of what a real apocalypse would be like, and that there's hope in that. As long as your land and air aren't completely destroyed, you can stay alive. That people have done this for thousands and thousands of years, survived without all the modern conveniences that we have now. And I'd like to see people shift their focus on what's important in life, But of course, that's, big dreams. It's not going to happen with everybody.
No, unfortunately.
But, I have had people tell me I had a woman tell me she bought a second house to fill up with stuff for survival.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, I wish I could afford to buy a second house.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen I think we've seen in the last couple of years that there are lots of people who are, who recognize that it takes community and we need to help each other. And then we've also seen the opposite side of that coin. And I don't want to get, too political or anything, but I think we've really seen some of that in the last couple of years.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Well, we see that the opposite way lies disaster. Mm-hmm. And the other way is the hope, is the way out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, also want people to think about how close to disaster we could really be, because we've been having more and more of them all the time because of climate change. And so I want people to think about, hey, we need to take care of what we've got. And then I have character, hopes for how people, I wanted to see an old woman be the star of a book, because there's just not very many of them.
Yeah. No, I love that about your first book.
But especially in sci-fi, there's really hardly any old women. There's a few, and I actually wrote an article about it, but I researched and found as many as I could. And there's a few out there, but there's far, far more old men than there are old women.
Yes.
And, probably like 5 or 6 to 1. Like Star Trek, the original Star Trek is a perfect example. They made all those movies. Mm-hmm. And, there's like 7 core characters and only one of them is a woman.
Yep. So, although now Star Trek, is it Discovery? There's a lot of women in that cast. Which is awesome.
Well, yeah, but are any of them old?
No. Old. There's one that's oldish, but not old.
Well, I asked Twitter for old women sci-fi characters, and I got all these women in their 40s and 50s. Jeez, I'm like, no, I'm talking retirement age or older.
Right.
And they're like, They came up with a few. But
I think even Captain Janeway was probably in her, what was she supposed to be, in her 50s at the time of that show?
Yeah.
I
think so. And then somebody even gave me Charlize Theron and Aeon Flux when she was in her 30s. I'm like, no. Don't even go there.
Don't make me smack you.
What people think, or there's like Carol in The Walking Dead, and she's got white hair and has had for most of the show. And I'm like, okay, she's in a zombie apocalypse, which is enough to make anybody go gray, even a tweener go gray. But also, she can't exactly color her hair, something I've been doing since the 80s.
Right.
And I just hit retirement age.
Well, and Carol, most people probably forget that Carol had a young daughter in the first season, so she wasn't that old.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And she's still not. She's still younger than me, which I think she's young, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's another couple hours of a podcast that we can do in terms of the disparity of the representation of men and women in sci-fi and Hollywood and books. But I'm glad that you wrote the character that you wanted to see.
Yeah, I tried to make Alma a standout character too. I had a little harder time with writing her than I did Kino because I raised boys, not girls, and it'd been a very long time since I was as young as Alma. But luckily I have a writing partner who helped me with make her better. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because she has a young daughter that age.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's one thing I think that's very helpful in the writing community. It's that you can kind of share those experiences that you haven't had, but somebody else has.
Right. I have the best writing partners, Laura Creedle and Aiden Polidoros. Mm-hmm. And we just make this great team where we kind of complement each other's skills and talents so that between us we can find we can improve each other's books a lot. I wouldn't be anywhere without them. So I'm
That's
very
wonderful.
grateful to them.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you have them. On the other side of the reading writing coin, what have you been reading lately since I talked to you last?
Well, I read The Goldfinch. I love that. I read Laura Creedle, my writing partner, has a new book that doesn't have a publisher yet. It's called The Deep Well. It's really good YA sci-fi. And Aiden, my other writing partner, he has a great book out that just came out a couple of months ago, The City Beautiful. It's a queer Jewish historical fantasy horror tale set in Chicago in the 1890s at the time of the World's Fair. And it's just beautifully written. I read a good crime, like kind of almost true story, crime story by a guy named Paul Doc Lafferty called Down the Lane. And I read two books by Brenda O'Shea, The Calling, and the sequel. I can't think of the name of the sequel. I was like something about. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't think of the name. But that's like an apocalyptic sci-fi set in the far, far distant future, and it's really good too. I haven't had as much reading time. Well, I read some John le Carré, some of his final books that came out after he died. He was like my favorite author ever. And I was just sad to see him go. Toni Morrison was very sad to see her go as well. I think she had a big influence on me.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but I haven't had a lot of reading time with the moving and the writing and the marketing.
Everything else.
Right.
Yeah, understandable. Well, if you would like to share your website as well as any social media that people can find you and interact with you on, that would be great.
Okay, my website has links to almost everything. And that is BrendaMarieSmith.com, and which is easy. The name's right on my books. and then I have Facebook, Brenda Marie Smith author, or you can also find it with books by Brenda Marie Smith. I'm on Twitter at B Smith Novelist. I'm on YouTube, Brenda Marie Smith, but there's links to that on my website. I've got a lot of guest blog posts out there. There's links to those on the website. I've got videos of me reading, and I'm trying Instagram, but I'm not doing so great with it. So I have an Instagram. I'm there on Instagram, but I'm not real good with using my phone for these things. I like to use the computer, and it's harder to do Instagram with a computer.
Yes, it's almost impossible to do Instagram with a computer, I think.
Well, you can, but you have to set it up every time. It won't just stay set up. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a pain.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you for that information. And then is there anything that we haven't talked about during our time together that you would like to bring up or highlight?
Well, after I wrote these books and all those apocalyptic type things actually happened, I started worrying that, am I making this happen by writing about it?
Yeah, can you write about everybody getting like a windfall or something?
Right. That's what my friend said. Could you write that we win the lottery? and I'm like, am I a conjurer of doom or what? Here, what's going on? But then, of course, I realized that I'm not nearly that powerful and that I'm not a conjurer of doom, but I'm telepathic with it. I can see, I have a knack for seeing it coming. So that's one thing I wanted to say. But also just there's so many wonderful people who help you when you write, like people like yourself and just other writers on Twitter. I've met so many great people, made great friends. I met a friend on Twitter. It turns out she lived 2 miles away from me, and and we've become really good buddies since then. And
Nice.
people help me, I help them, and it's really lovely community out there. Writers helping writers, and people supporting us, and it just I'm so grateful that I get to be part of that. And all the readers who just say wonderful things. And I have all these friends who are my fans now, who keep encouraging me to write. It really helps me keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Brenda, thank you so much for taking the time, even on Thanksgiving weekend, to talk to me about the new book and the first book. I really, really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm more than happy to do it. I was anxious. I just wanted to be here from the first minute that I knew the book was coming out. And so I'm just happy I got the chance, because I always have so much fun on your show, and you're such a pleasure.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. I love talking to you as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to Brenda for joining me to talk about If the Light Escapes, as well as If Darkness Takes Us, and the upcoming third book in this world. I do always enjoy when she joins me on the podcast, and we were chatting a little bit before over Twitter Messenger, and she was talking about Thanksgiving and meeting a new grandbaby, and so I mean she's just delightful, and she sent me pictures of the grandbaby, so that's going to make me ecstatic because I will look at everybody's grandbaby pictures. Absolutely, I love babies, and they just make me smile. So that was very sweet of her, and she is a very sweet person, but definitely somebody that you want on your side after the apocalypse. You need somebody like Brenda to be on your side and to have an extra house full of food, right? That would never have occurred to me. I guess I'm just not apocalyptically forward thinking enough. Oh, I got to move to Texas. I said I'd never move back to Texas, but apparently I need to go find out where B is moving and move into her neighborhood so that maybe she'll take pity on me after the apocalypse. At any rate, thank you to you as well for joining me. I hope that you will join me for the next episode. I will be speaking with author Ashley Winstead about her debut novel. It's called In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. And all I will tell you is that this book has made me actually very thankful for my mundane college experience. I'm cool that nothing terribly exciting ever happened to me in college. So to find out more, you're going to have to tune in to that episode. As always, I hope you're having a wonderful week. I hope that you are enjoying the author interviews and all the different books that we are discussing here on the podcast. If you are a fan of the podcast, please, as always, if you haven't done so already, do me the favor, the honor of writing a review or doing a starred review, whichever works better for the platform that you listen on. It can be, as simple as one sentence, but it really does help us to get this podcast out to more book lovers when people leave reviews. And then also follow on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I would love to hear from you, hear what you're reading, hear how your Thanksgiving went, or other holidays that people are celebrating. I know there's a lot this time of year, so yeah, just hit me up on social media and let me know what you're up to. Whatever you're up to, however your week is going, you know that I'm always going to hope that that week involves plenty of time for you to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.GSMC.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.